we shared the plight of the situation and the dynamics that we really have to put the politics aside and get a farm bill done because of the crisis we all in.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Louisiana Farm Bureau Podcast. I'm Carl Wiggers, and today I'm joined by Richard Fontenot, President of Louisiana Farm Bureau, and Andy Brown, Director of Public Policy and Commodities. Is that right? I question myself every time I say it, Andy. I'm sorry.
It's okay,
But
Carl.
Today you're wearing your National Affairs hat.
Yes.
And we're talking all things National Affairs Farm Bill. I know if you've listened to this podcast for a few weeks, you've heard us talk about it almost for a few weeks now. But that's going to be that's the message, that's the discussion, that's the topic that we're on for the next few months. Is that safe to say, guys?
Absolutely. Mr.
Fontenot, I know y'all just went on a trip, and that's what we're really wanting to talk about. You just went on a trip to D.C. talking Farm Bill, and you were with a handful of other producers, business folks from the entire country. Let's talk about that trip. How was it?
It's pretty dynamic in terms of the scale and scope of things. We had every commodity group for the most part represented there. We had a lot of our infrastructure, financial folks with the Farm Credit and the Bankers Association, as well as some retailers and equipment dealers. I mean, we were sharing and we walked hand in hand, sharing the message that the Farm Bill and the crisis we associated with. The current extension is going to be expiring at the end of the month, and we have to get something in place for our producers to have opportunity to put a crop in 2025.
Just for clarity, you're talking about a lot of folks from the industry, and not just from Louisiana, but from Midwest, from California, from Georgia.
Yeah, you had the Midwest, Southeast, Northeast, Northwest. I mean, everyone was there. Everyone was involved. The dynamics associated to it. Each region has some issues, but as a whole, the Farm Bill is that important to the whole agriculture sector across the country. So we had every state, if you will, represented there in the concerns of where we're moving forward for 25.
Yeah, it was really unique for any listener that's kind of in Farm Bureau circles. Farm Bureau is a general ag organization. We have Farm Bureau in every state, but this was led by our sister commodity organizations, National Cotton Council, Wheat Growers, Soybean Association, and USA Rice, one of which we're heavily partnered with, and Richard's had many leadership positions with. That's where our invitation came in, or his, and brought me to tag along. But it was really unheard of. All those groups do, just like Farm Bureau, have their fly-ins, bring their people in, scatter from across their growing regions, but to bring all those in, and then they created teams of a mix of those folks to go office to office. So it wasn't just the rice folks going to hit the rice offices, or the wheat growers hitting the wheat growing state offices. It was this dynamic mix of individuals with their lender, with some of their input suppliers, as this team all coming in and saying the same message. And that, we got together beforehand and talked about what that message would be, but it wasn't falsified. It wasn't made up. People weren't told what to say. It was that all those folks had a unified message, and so they were able to put that together in a really unique fly-in fashion.
It wasn't one commodity, and it also wasn't one state probably in the same rooms. Y'all were going to, you went to way more than the 5 or 6 offices that you're typically going to when you're representing Louisiana interest, right? You were probably getting a good full tour of the capital city.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, between Andy and I think we visited over 17 offices and different staffers, and not only the congressional offices, but we visited with some of the House Ag Committee folks, the Senate Ag Committee folks, and those folks who were encouraged. And we shared the plight of the situation and the dynamics that we really have to put the politics aside and get a farm bill done because of the crisis we all in. I had guys from Kentucky, from Indiana, and Florida, Mississippi, and we just corn grower guys, soybean folks there, cotton folks there, as Andy alluded to. And typically when you have Farm Bill conversation, everyone wants to key out a little segment for their particular industry, whether it be crop insurance or any kind of farm safety net mechanism, target prices and stuff. Everybody typically had different dynamics of support. That wasn't place for us at the table on this trip. This trip was the fact that we need something that's tangible, Current Farm Bill doesn't work. It's outdated. It's 2012 figures that was done in 2018. There is some efforts on the House side that had some equitable changes to the Farm Bill that can bring us to what I call a bankable Farm Bill in 2025. And that was the message, and the fact that we have to have something that's financially viable for our producers, to have a safety net for our lenders to use that paper to make a crop, because we have areas of the country that will not, without a Farm Bill in place, will not get a crop loan in 2025.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to kind of move to, you just kind of teased it a little bit. You're talking to all these different groups, you're talking to all these offices, you're sharing this message that seems to be hard to argue with or hard to, let politics get in the way of. What's their response when y'all are in these offices? What are you hearing back from the staffers or from the actual congressmen and women?
Well, unfortunately, right now, their main focus in D.C. is an election. We had a little election coming in November.
Heard about that.
And they're playing the politics on this one said, and he said, and well, we're going to do this if they do that. And those dynamics, and what we did and collectively was share the message that politics are important, elections are important, and we encourage everyone to vote. But at the end of the day, we have to feed our families, we have to feed our country, and we have to grow the food and fiber that holds this rural America together. And without a Farm Bill, we can't get that done. So we basically ask them to put politics aside, let's get a bipartisan effort together, sit down at the table, and it's time to get the work done. It's time Congress puts their hands, rolls up their sleeves, put their hands in it, and get a Farm Bill put together and find a consensus that we can get for our producers for 25.
Well, and the reality is it doesn't matter what happens in November. Those consistent needs that this group brought as the messaging of we need increased farm safety net, and then everything else comes second, that message is not going to change no matter who's in the White House, who has power in, the House or the Senate. That farm and the Farm Bill need is going to be there whether it's October or December. And so that's why we're really focused on getting something done in lame duck, because and again, if you hadn't heard, that's this period of time from the November election to the end of Congress, so the end of the year. You can come up with ideas of some sort of bridge payment ad hoc assistance, and then let's just extend the Farm Bill. But you're just continuing to kick the can down the road and put more pressure on our lending institutions, on these small business owners that are farmers. That's not gonna Congress. That's not going to do yourself any favor, because you got other big things to tackle next year: Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, just to name one of many. So that message seems to have rung true. It's been, I think, 2 weeks since we were there, and we've seen a lot of talk out in the press. You've seen those four corners, and when we talk about four corners in ag, the chair and the minority leader of each side of the table in both the House and the Senate. So G.T. Thompson and Debbie Stabenow as the chair is certainly leading the conversation, but you got to have all four corners at the table. And supposedly, from what we read and hear, that's been occurring since we were there. And you even seen Senator Bozeman take to the Senate floor and call for Congress to look at both ad hoc assistance and a Farm Bill getting passed. So all the message that we were there to give seems to have really made an impact.
Yeah. You mentioned this, Richard. I mean, we're talking about the closer we get to December, the more of those lending institutions are going to be like, that's when, like, this window, this lame duck window is also the same window that a lot of these farmers, with the exception of sugarcane folks who are still harvesting, a lot of farmers are getting their fields ready or getting their books ready or getting things ready for next year. And now is like crunch time for them to be starting to plan ahead and talking to these bankers. And these bankers are like, hey, we need this support from the Farm Bill, like to know that there's a Farm Bill that we can bank on, literally. What are y'all? I know you said you had some folks from lending institutions in your group. Y'all are going around. What's the story they're telling?
typically this time of year is harvest season, and we're going through, and when the combines leave the field, typically we start the next year's crops, whether it be some type of cultivation, bedding up, maybe pulling levees in the south, and things of that nature. We have producers being contacted by their bankers and saying, don't do anything for 25 crop yet till we see how all this plays out, because there's uncertainty whether or not we can make you a loan next year. And in my 30-some-odd years of farming, this is the first time that I actually hear bankers saying, well, put on the brakes. Let's see how the crop comes in. Because we have a good crop out there in most places. But the problem is the softening of the prices on the commodities and the inflation and the expenses we've had to incur. We inverted in terms of where we need to be on cash flow production. So it's not that we have a disaster in terms of crop. We just have a situation where trade and other issues have minimized the price the producers can get for their crop. And at the end of the day, don't cash flow. And that's where a safety net and the Farm Bill comes in. And without that in place, our producers and our bankers can't work on the 25 paperwork, like you said. So they're stopping them when the combine leaves the field. Let's park the brakes. Let's see where the numbers lie, whether or not I can give you a crop next year. That's pretty impactful, and it's very dynamic. And that sets the tone for 25 crop, in the fact that if you don't do the fall prep work, you're going to already be behind the 8 ball going into 25.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just the 2024 crop problem either. I mean, we've had multiple years in a row for a lot of, and let's just say we've been on this podcast when we singled out kind of our livestock folks with drought, and we've been on here talking about crawfish with their needs. So we're
22
not,
soybeans.
Right. So this group that you heard Richard be a part of was our more predominant row crop folks, because they're the most dependent, and they've built our farm policy structure has put most of their safety net eggs in the Farm Bill basket. So Title I reference prices, the PLC program, ARC for some other crops that aren't as, hasn't been as effective for folks in Louisiana, but both ARC and PLC. That's why we're focused on those folks now, because they depend on those safety net programs that are so outdated. And then they've had, these same challenges of Mother Nature and commodity prices, interest rates, input costs. All these things have created this storm that they're having a really hard time to overcome. So we heard all kind of stories of combines being repoed before they could even get their crop out, folks being told, get your crop out, but don't put a plow in the field. And then even for those that might, have a little longer leash on the line of credit, but are turning down farmland, prime farmland, next door to them or just down the road, that in most circumstances they would be scratching and clawing to get their hands on. They just simply can't put it on the books. So all those things culminate in the rural community to mean real loss for a lot of people, not just for the Richard Fontenots or the Mr. Joe, the peanut farmer that was on Richard's team from South Georgia comes to mind. These guys may be more well established, maybe have generational farms where they have some assets to take. They're eating into their equity there. But we heard a lot in D.C. about our young farmers, about folks that haven't been in the game this long. We had some on Richard's team that, were around that 40, 45-year-old mark, where they are so invested in this, they don't feel like they can go do another job now, but they're at the point where, why would I keep putting my family through this? None of those things are good for where any of us live. That's GDP that our parishes and counties have to have, and that's the challenge. That's the food security of a farm bill that it provides, not just, grocery store shelves, but local schools, local roads, you name it. It depends on that main source of revenue across rural America.
Well, I had this conversation on Friday with a soybean farmer out in Madison Parish, and he's 31, 32 years old. And he's like, look, if my farm goes under, if farms like mine go under, so do the the distribution, the elevators, the seed and chemical sales. And then I had the realization a lot of farmers would potentially leave farming and maybe go to one of those types of jobs because it's what they know, right? If those jobs are disappearing too, like where does that farmer go and get work? Not saying the farmer is not a resilient man that can go and find work elsewhere, but like even those other options that are out there for a lot of farmers potentially are disappearing. But he was sharing in the reality of like farms go away, banks go away, car dealerships go away, grocery store shelves get more expensive, all these different aspects that have that ripple effect. I know you talk about it all the time. They talk the spider web or the ag economy is way bigger than the farmer.
And the Farm Bill on top of that, if you look at the Farm Bill, I mean, we talk about the safety net it provides, but it also provides a food security for these food deserts you hear people talk about in different places. A lot of the programs in there. So the Farm Bill is a very dynamic implement and tool that Congress uses because it satisfies research, it satisfies a lot of food deserts, if you will, as well, and producers as a whole. So it's a multi-dynamic bill that affects everyone in rural America, everyone in agriculture, both from the farm all the way to the table. And what Congress needs to do, it is the tool that provides that food security to each and every one of us.
Yeah, and you said rural America, and I know that's where we focus a lot, but I know there are tons of food deserts in urban hubs, and it's not just farmers and people out in Madison Parish that are dependent on this thing, or Evangeline Parish, but people right here in East Baton Rouge or New Orleans, and those areas are heavily impacted by these programs that are in the Farm Bill. Andy, I know we're about to, as Farm Bureau, really get behind. We're obviously already working on this. We have been for years, honestly, but we're about to start a big push, and I know our department's going to be very involved in this. But what is the message? We kind of talked about it last podcast with you, but what's coming, I guess, for our membership to engage in?
Yeah, we're trying to lay out a very strategic timeline. The challenge for us and any listeners that want to be advocates for this cause is we've got 3 months to get it done. That's a short window, very few legislative days, but for folks, being the voice of Louisiana agriculture, to be the grassroots, that's a pretty long time to keep people's attention. So we're trying to be strategic about where we turn the throttle up and when, weeks we can ratchet it down. But more days, more weeks than not for the next 3 months, we're going to need people to be plugged in on this. Farm Bureau, Richard, myself, Mr. Harper Pryor, our staff, our board, kind of that day-to-day top engaged folks. We've been pushing on this for, you could say, 3 years now. We started our Farm Bill Task Force, Farm Bill Study Committee, over 2 years ago, and have had our priorities in, have been pushing, advocating, taking trips. We've been doing all those things, but that's not going to get it done. We're past that point. We saw that last September, and we're at another point in Congress that if ag's going to keep the strength that we claim to have, as the thin green line sometimes is referred to, if we're going to maintain that in this new era of Congress, this polarized Congress that we have, advocacy becomes the only way to do that. And that's not just our parish boards. That's not just our Young Farmer Committee. That's every person that, that's all 147,000 members. That's them telling their neighbors how important that is. That's a rock the vote kind of thing that we have to do. Can I tell you today that you're going to be able to make that distinction in November between the candidates you'll see on your ballot? No, because like I said, this is regardless of those politics. You make your decisions on who you vote for on plenty of things. We're not focused on November. We're focused on December and making sure that this Congress, the 118th Congress, gets this to the floor with a reliable, improved safety net. And then, because they didn't get it done last year, we would need them to add some sort of assistance to the farm community to get us to that now improved safety net.
And to expound on that, in terms of our congressional leadership, they understand the message. As Andy alluded to, we've been visiting with them and their staff, and they understand the importance. But at the end of the day, they have to articulate that, and they are doing it. But the more we can engage, the more we can give them more ammunition, if you will, of local support, more of a push that, look, I'm getting 30,000 phone calls, 40,000 letters, whatever it may be, and they bring that to Speaker's office, or they bring it to the Senate Ag Committee, or they bring it to the House Ag Committee. We're reinforcing their position and their strength and their opportunity to represent Louisiana in those efforts, but we're giving the leverage. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to reach out, give them as much leverage as they can and the leadership above them, so that we make sure we can get something done for our producers back in Louisiana.
And when I talk about elections and advocacy, Richard and I, he's right. We don't go up and threaten these elected officials like, if you don't vote for the Farm Bill, we won't vote for you next time. It's more about supporting our elected officials and saying, hey, look, here's these thousands of people who've reached out to you via a voter voice. Here's this many public campaigns that have helped educate those other voters that don't understand the Farm Bill, that love to post a Facebook comment about this is just mailbox money for farmers, or where's my check. All that rhetoric, at the end of the day, does influence the political process. So how do we get above the noise? How do we provide support and facts and resources, and to provide cover in the countryside to say, hey, no, I need a farm bill and I needed this ad hoc assistance, and this is how it benefits you. It helps our community. It helps the food on your store shelves be safest, most affordable, most abundant in the world. If folks can't believe in that anymore, then we have a real bedrock issue in our country. But for us as the Farm Bureau, we still believe in that and see it every single day.
Well, and that's what makes this job, especially Andy, for you and I, so rewarding, is that we get to work with these farmers that are putting food on our tables, so that you and I can have a job off the farm to support those farmers. Or my wife can work in healthcare, or your wife can work in interior design, and like people can be teachers and doctors and lawyers, because we have the farmers putting that food on our table, and we as a country should support that. And I think that's a pretty safe argument to make, but that's why we have the Farm Bureau. That's why we have farmers like Richard Fontenot going to D.C. telling that story.
Let us not forget what a broken supply chain looks like. I mean, we're just a few years removed from that. You know, if you have a truck that has some chip that didn't get put in it, and my uncle was telling me the other day, his automatic headlights don't work on his truck because he has a COVID truck. Think about that time. Think about how unsettling it is when Hurricane Francine comes and everybody goes and buys up all the bread off the shelves. You know, we're not here for scare tactics, but it is a reality that if you don't have the cushion, the safety, the comfort of the American food system to go to Carter's, Rouse's, Walmart, Sam's, wherever you grocery shop, that's a real thing. And I think we as Americans don't get out of our own borders enough to see that in other parts of the world. And it's a beautiful thing that our country has invested in, but we have to sustain that. And a farm bill does do that.
Well, that's why the Farm Bureau exists, is to support those farmers, support rural communities. So we're going to keep fighting that. If you want to learn more about the Farm Bill, about this advocacy effort, about anything we're doing or we're talking about in this podcast, I'll have links below to catch up and sign up for Voter Voice and be engaged, so that when we make the call, when we sound the alarms, when we start pulling out the trumpets and carrier pigeons and smoke signals, that you're ready to engage and be part of this effort, because we know we need to support our Louisiana farmers, our American farmers, and that Farm Bill is going to be a key part of that. Guys, thanks for being part of the podcast. For all you listeners out there, if you're watching this on YouTube, like this video, share it with a farmer down the road or across the country from you, so that they can know that this is important and that Farm Bureau is working on their behalf to make sure that we get a Farm Bill passed. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, share it with somebody, like it, subscribe to this podcast so you can hear it when we come out with a new one next week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again right here next week on the Louisiana Farm Bureau Podcast.